Nick and Sarah both struggle with anxiety, which affects their performance. Anxiety is a negative state of worry, apprehension, or tension that often occurs in the absence of real or obvious danger. Typically, the tension felt by anxious individuals is accompanied by a heightened state of physiological arousal, which was said by Buckworth and Dishman in 2002. It is a negative emotional state and is also often linked to there being increased amount of arousal. There is worry, nervousness, fear, and doubts. It is sparked by something which could be a risk or a threat to us because we don't think we're good enough to cope with them. So Nick and Sarah don't think they're good enough to cope with the risk or the threat, whereas Rachel sees it as a challenge. Stress is a response to a current demand that could or could not happen in the future. Stress could be either eustress, which is good stress, which is the stress Rachel has, or distress, which is the stress Nick and Sarah have, and it is a reaction to a threat in a moment or situation. Anxiety is a bad reaction of a player to stress, which normally results in there being an overload of arousal or too much arousal. Do Nick and Sarah suffer from cognitive or somatic anxiety? Sarah has cognitive anxiety because she gets worried in her head when she plays in the big games. It is the thought component of anxiety which is linked to worry and a fear of bad or negative evaluations or how you think you played. McNally in 2002 said the negative expectations and concerns about one's ability to perform and the possible consequences of failure. It is emotional feelings such as worry or apprehensions or not being able to concentrate and bad thoughts or negative thoughts, and the stress will lead to cognitive anxiety. Whereas Nick struggles with somatic anxiety. This is because he has started to feel nauseous due to his anxiety. Somatic anxiety is the physical component of anxiety associated with an increase of heart rate and blood pressure, and it has the same symptoms of arousal, but it's triggered because of cognitive anxiety. It is linked to how you see the physiological changes which happen in a certain situation in the body. The perceived physiological changes could be increased muscle tension, sweaty or clammy hands, increased heart rate, and feeling sick or a queasy stomach. What factors affect Nick and Sarah's anxiety? So some of the personal factors affecting anxiety and arousal could be trait anxiety. So Nick, for example, suffers with trait anxiety, so he's anxious in every situation, just constantly, whereas Sarah has state anxiety, so it's only in those big games that she struggles, which affects her anxiety. Self-esteem, so Nick and Sarah could doubt themselves or not think they're very good and put themselves down, which leads to lack of motivation, leading to anxiety, and their social physique anxiety. Some of the situational factors would be importance of a game, like Sarah's games against the local teams, because that's a very important game, which leads to her being more anxious and not knowing whether you're going to do well. So Nick and Sarah don't believe they're going to do well and don't really know whether, which leads to more anxiety. Situational and personal factors both lead to person by situation interaction, which leads to state anxiety or arousal. Nick struggles with trait anxiety because he gets anxious in everything he does, whether it's schoolwork or his games. Trait anxiety is a personality disposition which is the same or stable over a period of time. it is innate proneness that you're going to be anxious or worry, and too much trait anxiety can often mean that Nick is worried in all or a number of different types of situations. He overacts and gets very aroused too quickly, and feels threatened even if there's no actual threat to him, and the reaction is that he has high state anxiety. Nick would normally have more state anxiety in highly evaluative situations, whereas Sarah has state anxiety because she gets worried in those certain games against local teams rather than in every game, which causes her shooting percentages to go down, and she gets feelings called right now feelings that will change based on the situation. She has a temporary changing mood state that's an emotional response to the games against local teams, which would be a threat. State anxiety could be cognitive or somatic. What is competitive anxiety? As you can see in the bottom left, it's Gareth Southgate who missed the crucial penalty at the World Cup, whereas Pirlo scored a crucial penalty very coolly against England at the Euros. So different people see different types of situations differently in terms of competitive anxiety. So, for example, Sarah will see competitive sporting situations as maybe threatening, whereas Rachel would see them as a challenge. Competitive state anxiety usually follows patterns of subjective feelings of tension and inadequacy combined with heightened arousal of the ANS, which was said by Hackford and Schwenkomsger in 1989. Elite and average sports performers will get intense anxiety just before and during a performance. So both of these performers would have had extreme anxiety before they took their penalties, but elite performers like Rachel would have trained to control that anxiety, and Pirlo would train to control it, whereas Gareth Southgate couldn't. Rachel and Pirlo were trained to control that anxiety and stresses at crucial times before the big local games or a big penalty in the World Cup or European Championship. Some of the factors before competitions that would affect it would be fear of failure, missing a penalty, missing a shot in netball, missing a shot in tennis, a bad performance or a mistake. Especially for Sarah, fear of importance of those big local games in netball, fear of evaluation, fear of getting injured, a lack of control, especially in a penalty shootout. It's pretty much a guessing game, so Gareth Southgate might have struggled from a lack of control. During competition, players might struggle with evaluation of others, so the crowd or the opposition. So in this, Pirlo reacted well to Joe Hart making faces at him to try and put him off. Interaction with others, so Joe Hart was very aggressive towards Pirlo, and whereas Pirlo was very calm and friendly back to him, which meant that he could focus more on what he was doing. Injury or fatigue, the weather, so if it's raining, you might slip, or you might not be able to run as much because it's so hot, and successful failure. So for Sarah especially, a success in her shooting or a failure in her shooting like she struggles with in the big matches. How can anxiety be measured? Anxiety can be measured through observations, questionnaires, and through physiological features. There are 4 tests to measure anxiety and arousal. The Martin Sport Competitive Anxiety Test, or SCAT. Martin Competitive State Anxiety Inventory, CSAI. Spielberger State Trait Anxiety Inventory, STAI, or Smith Sport Anxiety Scale, SAS. So SCAT is a self-report applied to specific sporting situations, so it gives an idea of the performance level of state anxiety in competitive situations. So for example, Sarah, we'd be able to see the difference in her level of anxiety during the normal games in the middle of the season compared to the end of the season against the local teams, and compare them. And the 4 factors that relate to competitive anxiety is individuals, differences in how performers interact with different situations. So for example, Sarah and Rachel in the big local games react differently. Sarah reacts badly and performs worse and gets more anxious, whereas Rachel rises to the challenge and performs better, often getting player of the game. There are different types of anxiety, state and trait, which the performers have experienced. So Nick has a lot of trait anxiety, whereas Sarah has state. Exact anxiety trait only in competitive situations. And the 4th factor is the competitive situation. So for Sarah, it's the tough, big local games that she struggles in as her competitive situation. CSAI 2, using self-report to measure cognitive state anxiety, somatic state anxiety, and self-confidence. So we can measure Nick's self-confidence when he's playing tennis, because he often struggles with believing in himself and often falls apart. It will be given out several times prior to competition and discover baseline levels and compare with pre-competition levels. So Nick, for example, will probably have a lot higher in training compared to in competitions, because he does really well in training but then struggles in the matches. Cognitive state anxiety can be high a long time before the competition. It steadily increases just before competition, and it will fluctuate during performance as chance of winning or losing or doing well or badly changes. And somatic state anxiety lowers to begin with, as the body won't react that quickly. Then it increases quickly before competition and normally or generally decreases during competition. What are the individual differences? Hannin said that each athlete possesses an optimal zone or range of anxiety most beneficial for performance. Athletes have different optimal zones, and this is called zones of optimal functioning, ZOF. Research has told us that some individuals can tolerate a wide range of anxiety intensity before experience a decline in performance, whereas others perform best only when anxiety lies within a narrower range. Han 2000. So for example, Sarah and Rachel have different levels of anxiety they can experience, and Rachel performs best with more anxiety. And research shows over anxiety will negatively impact an athlete's sport performance. But if the anxiety is within the athlete's ZOF, then the results will be positive. So, for example, Rachel's anxiety will be within her ZOF because she has an increased performance level and does better with anxiety. Whereas Nick, it would be out of his ZOF because he performs worse. What is facilitative and debilitative anxiety? Well, Sarah, Nick and Rachel could have the same amount of anxiety, but Rachel reacts in a positive way to this, and it would make her feel more ready and be able to perform better, which is facilitative anxiety. Whereas Sarah and Nick would go, oh my god, and perform badly and react badly and think negatively about their game and perform worse, which is debilitative anxiety. But people with debilitative can be trained to think more positive thoughts and therefore do better. Like, not focus on our anxiety nerves, focus on good things.